Reba McEntire sings at a family party and sees her grandmother being kicked out. What she does next moves everyone. The worn leather purse trembled in Martha Sullivan's weathered hands as she stood before the towering iron gates of the Chandler mansion. At 78 years old, she had seen enough heartbreak to fill several lifetimes, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The invitation that had arrived 3 weeks ago still felt like a dream, or perhaps a cruel joke. After 5 years of silence, Victoria had finally reached out. Martha's fingers traced the edges of the handwritten recipe book tucked safely inside her purse. The pages were yellowed with age, stained with decades of love and flour, each recipe a memory of better times, when Victoria was just a little girl who would climb onto her grandmother's lap and beg for stories while the smell of caramel cake filled the kitchen. Those were the days before money changed everything, before Victoria married into wealth and forgot where she came from. The security guard at the gate looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain. Her simple navy dress and modest pearl necklace, a gift from her late husband 40 years ago, seemed woefully inadequate against the backdrop of imported marble and crystal chandeliers visible through the mansion's windows. But Martha had dressed with care tonight, choosing her finest outfit and even visiting the salon that afternoon to have her silver hair styled properly. She wanted Victoria to be proud of her. "Name?" the guard asked curtly, his finger hovering over his tablet. "Martha Sullivan," she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm Victoria Chandler's grandmother." The guard's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he found her name on the list and reluctantly opened the gates. As Martha walked up the winding driveway, her heart hammered against her ribs. The mansion rose before her like something from a fairy tale, all gleaming windows and perfect landscaping. Through the glass doors, she could see elegantly dressed people moving about with champagne flutes, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Tonight, she told herself, everything would change. Tonight, she would finally have her granddaughter back. But what Martha didn't know was that, at that very moment, in a black sedan parked discreetly behind the mansion's service entrance, sat someone who would change not just her night, but her entire life. Reba McEntire adjusted her simple black dress and checked her watch. She had arrived exactly on time for what was supposed to be the surprise of the evening, a private concert that Victoria Chandler had paid a fortune to arrange. The plan was simple: enter through the back, wait for the signal, then make her grand entrance to astound the guests and cement Victoria's status as the hostess of the year. If you're watching this story unfold and feeling that tingle of anticipation, I invite you to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Share with us in the comments where you're watching from tonight and let us know what you think will happen next. Your engagement means the world to us, and every story we tell is made better by this incredible community we've built together. Reba had performed for presidents and prime ministers, sold out stadiums across the world, but there was something about these intimate private shows that always made her nervous. Perhaps it was the pressure of performing for people who could afford anything, who might judge her not just as an entertainer, but as a curiosity, a country singer playing dress-up in their world of old money and new power. She had grown up in Oklahoma, the daughter of a rancher, and no amount of success could completely erase the feeling that she was still that little girl from the prairies, trying to prove she belonged. Inside the mansion, Victoria Chandler moved through her guests like a queen holding court. At 35, she had transformed herself completely from the small-town girl who used to visit her grandmother's farm during summer vacations. Her blonde hair was professionally styled in an elegant updo, her designer gown cost more than most people's cars, and her smile never wavered, even when she felt irritated. And tonight, she felt very irritated indeed. The guest list was perfect: oil executives, real estate moguls, society wives who could make or break reputations with a single word. Everything had been orchestrated to showcase her newfound position in Nashville's elite circles. Her husband, Richard Chandler, 43 years old and worth more money than she had ever dreamed possible, was deep in conversation with potential investors for his latest petroleum venture. This was her moment to shine, to prove that she belonged in this world of crystal and caviar. She had spent months planning this evening, every detail calculated for maximum impact. The mansion had been decorated by Nashville's most expensive interior designer. The catering came from the city's most exclusive restaurant, and the crown jewel, Reba McEntire herself, would perform a private concert that would have her guests talking for months. It was exactly the kind of coup that would solidify her reputation as a hostess worth knowing. So when Victoria spotted a figure in a simple navy dress near the entrance, her first instinct was confusion. Who had let the help into the main party area? She was about to signal to security when the woman turned, and Victoria's blood ran cold. It was Martha, her grandmother, looking older and more fragile than Victoria remembered, but unmistakably the woman who had raised her for 3 summers when her parents were going through their messy divorce. Panic fluttered in Victoria's chest. This was not part of the plan. Yes, she had sent the invitation. A moment of guilt-induced weakness after her assistant mentioned that Martha had been asking mutual family friends about her. But Victoria had assumed Martha would politely decline, or perhaps send a gift. She never imagined her grandmother would actually come, would actually stand there in her outdated dress among oil executives and society mavens. Martha's face lit up the moment she spotted Victoria across the room. The old woman began making her way through the crowd, clutching her purse tightly, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. Victoria watched in horror as heads turned to follow Martha's progress. The contrast was stark. Martha's simple appearance against the backdrop of designer gowns and expensive jewelry made her stand out like a sore thumb. "Victoria, sweetheart," Martha called out as she approached, her voice carrying the warm Oklahoma accent that Victoria had spent years training out of her own speech. "You look absolutely beautiful. I can hardly believe this is really happening." Victoria's practiced hostess smile felt like it might crack her face as she turned to greet her grandmother. Around them, conversations had quieted, and she could feel the curious stares of her guests. These were people who judged everyone and everything, who would dissect this moment for weeks to come. Her carefully crafted image was beginning to unravel with every step Martha took toward her. "Hello, Martha," Victoria managed, air-kissing her grandmother's cheek while maintaining enough distance to avoid wrinkling her gown. "How nice that you could make it." Martha beamed, reaching into her purse. "I brought something special for you. Remember when you were little, how you used to love my caramel cake? I wrote down the recipe, along with all the other family favorites. I thought perhaps—" She paused, her eyes searching Victoria's face hopefully. "I thought perhaps we could spend some time together, maybe even cook together like we used to." The recipe book in Martha's hands might as well have been a live grenade. Victoria could practically feel the judgment radiating from her guests. Mrs. Patterson, wife of the city's most influential banker, was whispering behind her fan to the oil minister's wife. The group of potential investors Richard had been courting was now staring openly at the scene unfolding before them. This was not the sophisticated, cultured image Victoria had spent 3 years building. This sweet, simple grandmother, with her homemade recipes and memories of a past Victoria desperately wanted to forget, was threatening to destroy everything she had worked for. In that moment, faced with the choice between her carefully constructed new life and the woman who had loved her unconditionally, Victoria made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, outside in the service area, Reba McEntire received the text message that it was almost time for her entrance. She had been watching through the kitchen windows as staff moved efficiently through their final preparations, and she had caught glimpses of the glittering party beyond. But something felt different tonight. Usually before a performance, she would be focused entirely on her setlist and stage presence, but tonight her mind kept wandering to thoughts of home, of her own grandmother who had passed away 10 years ago, of the simple values that had shaped her long before fame found her. She adjusted her earrings, simple diamonds that had belonged to her mother, and took a deep breath. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, she would give these people a show they would never forget. She had no idea how prophetic that thought would prove to be, or that the evening was about to take a turn that would challenge everything she thought she knew about courage, family, and standing up for what was right. As Reba prepared to enter the mansion through the service corridor, Victoria was about to make the biggest mistake of her life, and Martha Sullivan was about to discover that sometimes angels come disguised as country music superstars with hearts big enough to change the world. The weight of 30 pairs of eyes felt crushing as Victoria stared at the recipe book in Martha's trembling hands. Time seemed suspended in that crystalline moment, the gentle hum of expensive conversation fading to white noise around them. Victoria's throat felt tight, her carefully applied makeup suddenly heavy on her skin. She could see her reflection in the massive gilt mirror across the room, a woman who looked perfect on the surface, but felt like she was drowning. "Victoria?" Martha's voice was soft, uncertain now. The joy that had illuminated her weathered face moments before began to dim as she registered her granddaughter's expression. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" The endearment hit Victoria like a physical blow. Sweetheart. That's what Martha had always called her during those long summer afternoons when they would sit on the porch swing, Martha's gentle voice reading stories while Victoria curled against her grandmother's soft shoulder. The same voice that had soothed her nightmares when her parents' fighting had kept her awake, the same hands that had braided her hair and taught her how to measure flour for the perfect cake. But that was before Richard, before the mansion, before she had learned that love didn't pay for designer dresses or secure invitations to the governor's charity gala, before she had discovered that in Nashville's elite circles, your worth was measured not by the warmth of your heart, but by the coldness of your bank account. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, wife of the most powerful banker in Tennessee, stepped closer to their small group, her eagle eyes taking in every detail of Martha's appearance. Eleanor was 62 years old, silver-haired and sharp as a blade, with the kind of influence that could make or break social careers with a single raised eyebrow. Victoria had spent 2 years cultivating Eleanor's approval, and she could see that approval wavering like a candle in a hurricane. "Victoria, dear," Eleanor said in her cultured southern drawl, "aren't you going to introduce us to your friend?" The word friend dripped with polite poison. Victoria felt her stomach clench. This was her moment of truth, her crossroads. She could feel Richard watching from across the room, could see the oil executives he was courting beginning to take notice of the disturbance. Everything she had built, everything she had worked for, balanced on the edge of this moment. "Of course," Victoria said, her voice artificially bright. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Martha Sullivan. She was our family's housekeeper for many years. She practically raised me during some difficult times." The words fell from her lips like stones into still water, each one creating ripples of shock that spread through both women. Martha's face went pale, her grip on the recipe book tightening until her knuckles turned white. The lie wasn't complete. Martha had taken care of her, but the deliberate omission of their blood relationship felt like a betrayal of everything sacred between them. How charming," Eleanor said, her tone making it clear that she found it anything but charming. "It's always nice when the help remembers their place in the family." Martha's breath caught audibly. Victoria saw the exact moment her grandmother's heart broke, saw the light go out of those kind brown eyes that had looked at her with such love and hope just moments before. The recipe book trembled in Martha's hands, and Victoria noticed for the first time how frail her grandmother had become, how the years had carved lines of loneliness and loss into her once vibrant face. I'm sorry," Martha whispered, her voice barely audible above the resumed conversations around them. I misunderstood the invitation. I thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence. What could she say? That she had thought her granddaughter loved her, that she had believed family meant something more than social convenience, that she had spent 3 weeks planning what to wear and practicing what to say for this moment of reunion. Victoria watched her grandmother struggle with the words and felt something dark and cold settle in her chest. She had made her choice. There was no going back now. The oil executives were still watching, Eleanor Patterson was still judging, and Richard was depending on tonight's connections to secure his next big deal. Martha's hurt feelings would heal, but a ruined reputation in Nashville society would last forever. "Martha," Victoria said, her voice gaining strength as she committed fully to her betrayal, "I appreciate you coming tonight, but as you can see, this is a rather sophisticated gathering. Perhaps it would be best if you—" She didn't need to finish. Martha's shoulders sagged as if she had been physically struck. The old woman clutched the recipe book to her chest like a shield, and Victoria could see tears beginning to form in her eyes. Around them, the party guests began to turn away, the momentary entertainment of watching awkwardness unfold, losing its appeal as they returned to their champagne and business deals. But Martha wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. This was her granddaughter, the little girl she had sung to sleep, the child she had taught to ride a bicycle and bake cookies. Surely underneath this cold stranger, some part of that sweet child remained. "Victoria, please," Martha said, taking a step closer and lowering her voice. "I know I don't belong here with all these important people. I know I'm just a simple old woman from Oklahoma. But you're my granddaughter. You're all the family I have left. When I got your invitation, I hoped. The raw pain in Martha's voice cut through Victoria's defenses for just a moment. She remembered summer mornings in Martha's kitchen, the smell of bacon and coffee, the way her grandmother would hum old country songs while she cooked. She remembered feeling safe and loved in that little farmhouse, feeling like she belonged somewhere in a way she had never felt anywhere else. But then she caught sight of Richard across the room, saw him shake his head almost imperceptibly. The message was clear: handle this, or there would be consequences. Richard Chandler hadn't built his fortune by tolerating embarrassment, and he certainly wouldn't tolerate a wife who couldn't manage her own family. "That's enough," Victoria said, her voice growing sharp. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. You're clearly not comfortable here, and honestly, you're making our guests uncomfortable as well." Martha recoiled as if she had been slapped. The recipe book slipped from her fingers, hitting the marble floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet space around them. Pages scattered across the polished stone, decades of handwritten family recipes spreading like fallen leaves. Martha immediately dropped to her knees, trying to gather the precious papers, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp them. "I'm so sorry," Martha whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I'll clean this up. I'll go." The sight of her 78-year-old grandmother on her hands and knees, scrambling to collect the scattered recipes while fighting back tears, should have broken Victoria's heart, should have sent her rushing to help, should have reminded her of every kindness Martha had ever shown her. Instead, Victoria felt only a burning shame that was quickly transforming into anger. This was supposed to be her night, her moment of triumph. And here was Martha, on the floor of her perfect party, creating exactly the kind of scene that would have people talking for all the wrong reasons. Victoria could see guests beginning to stare again, could feel the weight of their judgment and speculation. "Security!" Victoria called out, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "Could you please help Mrs. Sullivan to her car? I think she's ready to leave." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Two men in dark suits appeared as if from nowhere, moving toward Martha with professional efficiency. The entire party seemed to hold its breath, sensing that they were witnessing something significant, something that would be discussed in whispered conversations for months to come. Martha looked up from the floor, her eyes meeting Victoria's for what would be the last time. In that gaze, Victoria saw not anger or hatred, but something infinitely worse: profound disappointment and the death of love. Martha had looked at her granddaughter and seen a stranger, someone who could watch family be humiliated and feel nothing but relief. "I understand," Martha said quietly, accepting help from one of the security guards to stand. "I won't bother you again." As Martha was escorted toward the exit, still clutching a handful of recipe pages, Victoria turned back to her guests with a bright smile that felt like it might crack her face in half. The conversations resumed, the champagne continued to flow, and the party moved forward as if nothing had happened. But someone had seen everything. Someone had watched the entire heartbreaking scene unfold from the shadows near the service entrance. Someone who understood the value of family recipes and the irreplaceable worth of grandmothers who loved unconditionally. Reba McEntire stood frozen in the doorway, leading from the kitchen area, her hand still on the handle, her entrance completely forgotten. She had arrived at precisely the moment Martha's recipe book hit the floor, had watched an elderly woman be treated like garbage by someone who should have treasured her above all else. The scene before her was so shocking, so fundamentally wrong, that for a moment she couldn't process what she was seeing. This was the woman who had hired her? This cold, cruel creature who could humiliate her own grandmother in front of strangers? Reba felt her blood pressure rising, felt the familiar fire that had gotten her in trouble more than once throughout her career. She had been raised by strong women who taught her that family was everything, that respect for elders was non-negotiable, that standing up for the powerless was not optional. And now she was watching the complete opposite of everything she believed in. As Martha disappeared through the front doors, escorted out like a criminal, Reba made a decision that would change the course of the evening entirely. The show Victoria had paid for was about to happen, but it wouldn't be anything like what she had ordered. This party was about to become something very different indeed. The silence that followed Martha's departure felt suffocating. Reba McEntire stood in the shadows of the service entrance, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. In all her years in the entertainment industry, through countless backstage dramas and celebrity meltdowns, She had never witnessed anything quite so cruel. The image of that sweet, elderly woman on her knees, gathering scattered recipe pages while fighting back tears, burned itself into her memory like a brand. Reba's hands trembled as she thought of her own grandmother, Reba McEntire, who had passed away 10 years ago, but whose voice still echoed in her heart. Clara had been a woman of quiet strength and boundless love, who had taught Reba that success meant nothing if you forgot where you came from. Clara would have been horrified by what just happened here tonight. The party had resumed its artificial gaiety, but Reba could see the undercurrent of whispered conversations and meaningful glances. The guests were processing what they had witnessed, some looking uncomfortable, others seeming almost entertained by the drama. Victoria moved among them with renewed confidence, clearly believing she had handled an embarrassing situation with appropriate firmness. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced, her voice carrying across the marble expanse of the main hall, "I hope you'll forgive that little interruption. Sometimes the past has a way of intruding on the present, but we mustn't let it spoil our evening." The casual dismissal of Martha's pain hit Reba like a physical blow. She watched Victoria laugh at something Mrs. Patterson whispered in her ear, watched her touch her husband's arm possessively as she rejoined his circle of potential investors. This woman had just destroyed her own grandmother's heart and was treating it like a minor inconvenience. Reba closed her eyes and took a deep breath, centering herself the way she always did before a performance. But this wouldn't be the performance Victoria had paid for. This would be something entirely different. She thought of every interview where she had talked about her values, every song she had sung about family and loyalty, every time she had stood on stage and proclaimed that her success meant nothing without the love of the people who had raised her. It was time to practice what she preached. Reba stepped out of the shadows and into the bright lights of the party. Her entrance was quiet at first, just another figure in a black dress moving through the crowd. But as recognition began to ripple through the room, conversations started to falter. Guests began turning toward her, their eyes widening as they realized who had just appeared among them. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Is that really Reba McEntire?" Victoria's head snapped up from her conversation, her face lighting up with triumphant satisfaction. This was it, the moment that would cement her status as Nashville's premier hostess. She had pulled off the impossible, securing the Queen of Country Music for a private performance that would have her guests talking for months. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria called out, her voice ringing with pride, "I have a very special surprise for you tonight. Please join me in welcoming the legendary Reba McEntire." The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. These were people who appreciated exclusive experiences, and a private concert from one of country music's biggest stars was exactly the kind of luxury they lived for. Victoria beamed as she moved toward Reba, clearly expecting gratitude and professional deference. But Reba didn't move toward the small stage that had been set up in the corner of the room. Instead, she walked directly to where Martha's recipe book had fallen. Several loose pages still lay scattered on the marble floor, overlooked in the hasty cleanup. Reba knelt down and carefully gathered them, her movements deliberate and reverent. The room watched in confused silence as she examined the handwritten recipes. These weren't just instructions for food, they were family history written in fading ink. "Martha's famous caramel cake," read one page in careful cursive, "made this for Victoria's 8th birthday. She ate 3 pieces." Another page detailed Grandma's cornbread, with a note scrawled in the margin. "Victoria always asked for extra honey butter." Reba's throat tightened as she read the love embedded in every word, every carefully preserved memory. These recipes told the story of a woman who had poured her heart into caring for a granddaughter who had just rejected her completely. "Miss McEntire," Victoria's voice had taken on a slight edge of concern. "Is everything all right? We're ready for your performance whenever you are." Reba stood slowly, clutching the recipe pages in her hands. When she looked up, her eyes found Victoria's across the room, and the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. The smile on Victoria's face began to fade as she registered the expression on Reba's face. "I'm afraid there's been a change of plans," Reba said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. "You see, I've just witnessed something that's made me reconsider my participation in tonight's festivities." Victoria's face went pale. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Is there some problem with the sound system? The lighting, whatever it is, we can fix it immediately. The problem," Reba said, taking a step forward, "isn't with your equipment. The problem is with your heart." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. This was not going according to plan, and everyone could sense it. The atmosphere shifted from celebratory to tense, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. "I don't know what you think you saw," Victoria said, her voice tight with controlled panic, "but I assure you there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Reba replied firmly. "I saw a sweet elderly woman, your grandmother, I believe, treated with shocking cruelty by someone who should have been honored by her presence. I saw family recipes scattered across the floor like garbage. I saw love met with contempt." The words hung in the air like accusations. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding their champagne glasses fascinating. They had witnessed the scene with Martha, but none of them had expected it to be called out so directly. "Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Miss McEntire, surely you understand that sometimes family situations are complicated." Victoria was simply maintaining appropriate boundaries. "Appropriate boundaries?" Reba's voice rose slightly, her Oklahoma accent becoming more pronounced as her emotions intensified. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I know something about family. I was raised by women who taught me that blood is thicker than social status, that love is more valuable than money, and that how you treat the people who raised you says everything about who you really are." Victoria's composure was cracking. "You don't understand the situation. Martha can be difficult. She doesn't fit in with this crowd. I was trying to spare everyone embarrassment." "Embarrassment?" Reba's laugh was sharp and humorless. "The only embarrassment I see here is a woman who's forgotten that the love of a grandmother is the most precious thing in this world. Do you have any idea what I would give for one more day with my own grandmother? One more conversation, one more hug, one more chance to tell her how much she meant to me." The raw emotion in Reba's voice seemed to strip away the artificial politeness that had coated the evening. Several guests looked genuinely moved, while others appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "My grandmother Clara raised me to believe that success without character is just another word for failure," Reba continued, her voice growing stronger. "She taught me that it doesn't matter how high you climb if you forget to help the people who lifted you up. And she would be absolutely horrified by what I witnessed here tonight." Richard Chandler finally spoke up, his voice carefully controlled but with an underlying threat. "Miss McEntire, we've paid you a considerable sum for entertainment, not a lecture. Perhaps we should focus on why you're here." Reba turned to face him directly, and the steel in her gaze made him take an involuntary step backward. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Chandler. You did pay me to be here tonight, but what you paid for and what you're going to get are two very different things." She held up the scattered recipe pages, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "These recipes represent decades of love, care, and family tradition. They're worth more than this entire mansion and everything in it, because they represent something money can't buy: the unconditional love of family." Victoria's mask of composure finally slipped completely. "This is ridiculous. You're making a scene over nothing. Martha is fine. She's probably already forgotten about it." "Martha is 78 years old," Reba said quietly, but her words carried like thunder. "She came here tonight with hope in her heart and love in her hands. She brought these recipes as a bridge between your past and present, and you burned that bridge in front of everyone. Do you really think she's fine? Do you really think she'll forget being humiliated by the granddaughter she helped raise?" The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stood frozen, her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around her. The guests watched with the fascination of people witnessing a train wreck, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe the destruction. Reba looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each guest in turn. "I've performed for presidents and paupers, for royalty and ranch hands. I've learned that true class has nothing to do with bank accounts or pedigree. It has everything to do with how you treat people when you think no one important is watching." She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "Well, I was watching tonight, and what I saw was a profound failure of character that no amount of money or social status can excuse. The party that had begun with such promise was transforming into something none of them had expected, a reckoning that would change everything." The tension in the room was palpable, as Reba's words settled over the gathered elite like a heavy blanket. Victoria stood frozen, her face cycling through shades of pale, as she realized her carefully orchestrated evening was spiraling completely out of control. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some looking toward the exits, others pulling out their phones to capture what was clearly becoming the social event of the decade, though not in the way Victoria had intended. Richard Chandler's jaw tightened as he watched his wife's reputation crumble in real time. He had built his empire on the principle that image was everything, that perception could be more valuable than reality. And right now, his wife was being publicly destroyed by one of the most respected figures in American entertainment. "I think we've heard enough," Richard said, stepping forward with the authoritative presence that had cowed business rivals for decades. "Miss McEntire, you're clearly upset, but you're also clearly out of line. This is a private party and you're a paid entertainer. I suggest you remember your place." The words were like gasoline on a fire. Reba's eyes flashed with a fury that made several guests take instinctive steps backward. In that moment, she wasn't the polished performer or the media-savvy celebrity. She was the daughter of Oklahoma ranchers, raised by people who knew the difference between respect and submission. "My place?" Reba's voice was dangerously quiet. "Mr. Chandler, let me tell you about my place. My place is standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. My place is remembering where I came from and honoring the people who got me here. My place is using whatever platform I have to speak truth to power." She turned to address the entire room, her voice rising with conviction. "You want to know what my place is? My place is with Martha Sullivan, a woman who raised a granddaughter with love and patience, who taught her family recipes and family values, who came here tonight with nothing but hope in her heart and recipes in her hands." Victoria finally found her voice, though it trembled with barely controlled panic. "This is insane. You don't know anything about my family situation. Martha can be difficult. She doesn't understand." "She doesn't understand what?" Reba interrupted sharply. "She doesn't understand that love should be conditional? That family should be ashamed of their roots? That success means forgetting everyone who helped you achieve it?" The room was dead silent, except for the soft clicking of phone cameras. This confrontation would be all over social media within minutes, shared and reshared until it reached every corner of Nashville society and beyond. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, sensing the social catastrophe unfolding, attempted to diffuse the situation. "Perhaps we should all take a moment to calm down. These things can be resolved privately." "No," Reba said firmly. "This needed to be public because the humiliation of Martha Sullivan was public. Everyone in this room watched it happen, and most of you did nothing. Some of you even seemed entertained by it." She walked closer to the center of the room, still clutching Martha's scattered recipe pages. "I want you all to understand something. These recipes aren't just instructions for food. They're love letters written in flour and sugar. They're memories preserved in handwriting that's growing shaky with age. They're the legacy of a woman who spent her life caring for others." Reba held up one of the pages. "This one is for Martha's famous caramel cake. There's a note here that says, 'Made this for Victoria's 8th birthday. She ate 3 pieces.' Can you imagine the joy in Martha's heart when she wrote that? Can you imagine how proud she was to make her granddaughter happy?" Victoria's face crumpled slightly, and for a moment the mask slipped completely. A flicker of the little girl who had indeed eaten 3 pieces of that caramel cake crossed her features, but it was quickly replaced by defensive anger. "You're being manipulative," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're trying to make me look like a monster because of one difficult moment." "One difficult moment?" Reba's laugh was bitter. "You presented your own grandmother as hired help. You watched her gather scattered papers from the floor while you stood there embarrassed by her existence. You had her escorted out by security like she was some kind of threat. That wasn't a difficult moment. That was a choice that revealed exactly who you've become." Dr. James Morrison, one of the oil executives Richard had been courting, stepped forward uncomfortably. "Miss McEntire, while we appreciate your passion, perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue for family therapy." Reba turned to face him directly. "Dr. Morrison, isn't it? I know who you are. Your company's environmental record, your business practices, the way you treat your employees. You're absolutely right. This isn't family therapy. This is a reckoning." The implication hung heavy in the air. Reba wasn't just confronting Victoria. She was challenging the entire room, the entire system of values that prioritized profit over people, status over substance. "I came here tonight to perform for you," Reba continued. her voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. "But I can't in good conscience entertain people who find cruelty acceptable, who think family is disposable, who believe that money excuses any behavior." She moved toward the small stage that had been set up for her performance, but instead of picking up the microphone, she placed Martha's scattered recipes carefully on the piano. "I'm going to tell you what's going to happen now," Reba announced. "I'm going to leave this party and find Martha Sullivan. I'm going to apologize to her on behalf of everyone in this room who should have spoken up and didn't. I'm going to ask her to teach me how to make that caramel cake, because I guarantee you it's better than anything your fancy caterers could ever produce." Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. "You can't do this. I paid you. We have a contract." "Keep your money," Reba said simply. "Consider it compensation for the education you've given me tonight about the difference between having class and having character." The gasps from the crowd were audible. In Nashville's entertainment industry, turning down money was almost unheard of, especially the kind of money the Chandlers were known to pay. Richard's face was purple with rage. "You'll never work in this town again. I have connections throughout the industry. I'll make sure everyone knows how unprofessional you've been." Reba smiled, but there was steel behind it. "Mr. Chandler, I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've survived industry changes, personal tragedies, and countless attempts by powerful men to silence me. Do you really think your threats scare me?" She looked around the room one final time. "I want everyone here to remember this moment. Remember that you had a choice tonight between comfort and courage, between status and substance. Most of you chose to stay silent while an elderly woman was humiliated. That says more about who you are than any designer dress or expensive car ever could." Several guests were now openly recording with their phones, realizing they were witnessing what would undoubtedly become legendary in Nashville social circles. The story would spread like wildfire. The night Reba McEntire walked out on the elite to defend a mistreated grandmother. Victoria made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Wait, please, this has all been a misunderstanding. Maybe we could call Martha back, apologize." "Now you want to apologize?" Reba's voice was incredulous. "After she's been humiliated and escorted out, after you've shown everyone exactly who you are, you think you can just call her back and fix this?" I was under pressure. The party was important. I made a mistake." "You made a choice," Reba corrected firmly, "and choices have consequences. Martha Sullivan deserved better from you tonight, and so did everyone in this room who witnessed your cruelty." As Reba moved toward the exit, several guests began to follow her lead, clearly uncomfortable with staying at a party that had become the scene of such drama. The exodus was small but noticeable, and Victoria watched in horror as her perfect evening continued to disintegrate. Mrs. Patterson grabbed Victoria's arm. "Do something, stop her. This is going to be all over town by morning." But Victoria seemed paralyzed, watching helplessly as her reputation, her standing in society, and her relationship with her grandmother all crumbled simultaneously. The weight of her choices was finally catching up with her, and there was nowhere left to hide. Reba paused at the doorway, turning back one final time. "To anyone in this room who has family they've been taking for granted, I suggest you call them tonight. Tell them you love them. Ask them about their recipes, their stories, their memories, because money can buy you a mansion, but it can't buy you the love of a grandmother who's spent her life caring for you." With that, she walked out into the night, leaving behind a room full of shocked guests and one woman who had just learned that some mistakes can never be undone. Reba McEntire stepped out into the cool Nashville night, the contrast between the artificial warmth of the mansion and the honest chill of the evening air feeling like a cleansing breath. Behind her she could hear the murmur of shocked conversations and the hurried footsteps of guests making their own exits. The party that was supposed to have been Victoria's crowning social achievement had become her complete undoing. But Reba's mind wasn't on the destruction she had left behind. Her thoughts were entirely focused on finding Martha Sullivan, a woman who was probably sitting alone somewhere, believing that her own granddaughter truly saw her as nothing more than an embarrassing relic from the past. Reba had asked the valet for directions to the nearest hotel, assuming that's where Martha might have gone, but her instincts told her to try something else first. She had been performing in Nashville long enough to know the city's rhythms, and she suspected that a woman like Martha wouldn't retreat to some expensive hotel to nurse her wounds. She would go somewhere that felt like home. 20 minutes later, Reba found herself pulling into the parking lot of Hermitage Cafe, a 24-hour diner that had been serving Nashville for over 70 years. The neon sign flickered with nostalgic charm, and through the large windows, she could see the red vinyl booths and black and white checkered floor that had welcomed countless heartbroken souls over the decades. And there, in a corner booth with her back to the window, sat Martha Sullivan. The older woman was hunched over a cup of coffee, her simple navy dress looking even more modest under the harsh fluorescent lighting. Her purse sat beside her on the booth, and Reba could see the corner of what remained of the recipe book peeking out. Martha's shoulders shook slightly, and Reba realized she was crying. Quiet, dignified tears that spoke of a lifetime of disappointments, but also of a strength that refused to be completely broken. Reba took a deep breath and walked into the diner. The bell above the door chimed softly, and a few late-night customers looked up with mild interest. When they recognized her, their eyes widened, but something in her expression kept them from approaching. This wasn't a moment for autographs or selfies. Martha didn't look up when Reba slid into the booth across from her. She was too lost in her own pain, too focused on trying to understand how the sweet little girl she had raised had become someone who could be so cruel. "Excuse me," Reba said softly. "I believe these belong to you." Martha looked up, and her eyes widened in shock as she saw Reba carefully placing the scattered recipe pages on the table between them. The pages had been organized and smoothed out, treated with the reverence they deserved. I don't understand," Martha whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. Why are you—" "I was at the party," Reba explained gently. "I saw what happened, and I wanted you to know that not everyone there agreed with how you were treated." Martha's eyes filled with fresh tears. "You were performing for Victoria? Oh, I'm so sorry. I must have ruined everything. I should never have gone. I should have known better." "No," Reba said firmly. "You have nothing to apologize for. You are Victoria's grandmother. You raised her. You loved her. You had every right to be there, and you should have been honored, not humiliated." The simple validation seemed to break something open in Martha. The tears came harder now, but they were cleansing tears, the kind that wash away shame and begin the process of healing. "I don't know what happened to her," Martha said between sobs. "She used to be such a sweet child. She would spend entire summers with me, and we would cook together, and she would tell me all her dreams. She wanted to be a teacher then, said she wanted to help children the way I had helped her." Reba reached across the table and took Martha's weathered hands in her own. "Tell me about those summers." And Martha did. She told Reba about the little girl who would wake up early just to help with breakfast, who would sit on the kitchen counter while Martha cooked, asking endless questions about family history and begging for stories about her father when he was young. She told her about the afternoons they spent in the garden, Martha teaching Victoria about different herbs and vegetables, Victoria carefully writing down everything in a little notebook she called her wisdom book. "She loved my caramel cake the most," Martha said, managing a small smile through her tears. "She said it tasted like love. I taught her how to make it when she turned 12. She was so proud of herself, and she made one for her parents when they came to pick her up. They barely touched it." As Martha talked, Reba felt her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. She recognized the love in every story, the patience and nurturing that had shaped Victoria into someone who could have been extraordinary if she had held on to those values. "Would you teach me?" Reba asked suddenly. "The caramel cake recipe. I'd love to learn it." Martha's eyes lit up for the first time that evening. "You really want to learn? But you must have people who cook for you, professional chefs." "I do," Reba admitted, "but there's something special about learning from someone who cooks with love. My own grandmother taught me to make cornbread when I was Victoria's age, and it's still one of my most treasured memories." They spent the next hour at that diner table, Martha explaining the intricacies of the caramel cake, while Reba took notes on a napkin. The recipe wasn't just about ingredients and measurements. It was about timing and intuition, about knowing when the caramel was the perfect shade of amber, about understanding that the secret ingredient was always the love you put into it. As they talked, other customers began to recognize what was happening. Word spread quietly through the diner that Reba McEntire was sitting with an elderly woman, treating her like the most important person in the world. No one interrupted, but everyone watched with growing respect for both women. "I have an idea," Reba said, as Martha finished explaining the recipe. "I'm doing a benefit concert next month for music education in rural schools. Would you be my special guest?" I'd love to introduce you to the audience as one of the strongest women I've ever met. Martha's eyes widened. Oh, I couldn't possibly. I'm just a simple woman from Oklahoma. I don't belong at something like that. Martha, Reba said seriously, you belong anywhere I say you belong. And I say you belong on that stage with me, being celebrated for the incredible woman you are. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, the party had completely disintegrated. The remaining guests stood in small clusters, whispering about what they had witnessed. Many had already left, uncomfortable with the toxic atmosphere that lingered after Reba's departure. Victoria stood in the middle of her destroyed dream, watching her carefully constructed world crumble around her. Mrs. Patterson approached her with barely concealed disgust. Victoria, dear, I think it's best if we leave now. This has been most unfortunate. One by one, the remaining guests made their excuses and departed. The oil executives Richard had been courting left without scheduling any follow-up meetings. The society wives who had been Victoria's ticket to acceptance made it clear that invitations would not be forthcoming. The mansion that had been full of laughter and possibility an hour earlier now felt like a mausoleum. Richard found Victoria standing alone in the main hall, surrounded by the remnants of their party. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked, his voice cold with fury. "Do you understand how much damage this will cause to our reputation, to our business relationships?" Victoria didn't answer. She was staring at a single recipe page that had been missed in the cleanup, a handwritten note for Victory's favorite chocolate chip cookies, with a smiley face drawn in the margin, and Love Grandma Martha written at the bottom. For the first time in years, Victoria remembered who she used to be. She remembered the little girl who had loved her grandmother more than anyone else in the world, who had felt safe and cherished in that simple farmhouse kitchen. She remembered the woman she had been before money and status became more important than love and family. But was it too late to find her way back? 3 months later, Martha Sullivan stood on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, her arm linked with Reba McEntire's, as thousands of people gave them a standing ovation. She was wearing a beautiful new dress, a gift from Reba, but more importantly, she was wearing a smile that radiated pure joy. "This is my friend, Martha Sullivan," Reba announced to the crowd. "She taught me that the most important recipes aren't just for food, they're for life, for love, for kindness, for never forgetting where you come from." The cookbook they had written together, Recipes from the Heart, Family Traditions Worth Keeping, had become a bestseller, with all proceeds going to support programs for elderly people who had been abandoned by their families. Martha had found a new purpose, sharing not just her recipes but her story, inspiring others to reconnect with their own family traditions. As for Victoria, she had tried multiple times to contact her grandmother, but Martha's phone number had been changed, and her old address was no longer valid. Victoria had lost more than her grandmother that night. She had lost herself. The social consequences had been severe, but the personal consequences were devastating. Standing in the wings of the Grand Ole Opry, watching her grandmother receive the love and respect she had always deserved, Victoria finally understood what she had thrown away. Money could buy a mansion, but it couldn't buy back a grandmother's love. Status could open doors, but it couldn't unlock a heart that had been closed by cruelty. Some lessons come with a price that can never be repaid. Victoria Chandler had learned that lesson too late, while Martha Sullivan had learned that sometimes angels come disguised as country music stars who understand that family recipes are seasoned with love, and that love shared is love multiplied. The story ends here, but its lesson echoes eternal. In the end, we are not measured by what we accumulate, but by whom we love and how we treat them. Martha Sullivan, at 78 years old, had found her wings. Victoria Chandler, at 35, had learned that some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt, and somewhere in Oklahoma, the wind still carries the smell of caramel cake and the whispered prayers of grandmothers who love unconditionally, hoping that somehow, someday, their grandchildren will remember the way home.